In this video, I'll be working on turning this monstrosity behind me into something more useful and hopefully better looking. We're in the process of renovating this bathroom. It looked like this when we moved in, and today it looks like this. There's still a fair bit to be done here. You'll see that we don't yet have a shower tray in or a sink or toilet installed. I've got some exclusive videos available about the bathroom renovation, available via YouTube channel membership and Patreon. Links to those down below in the description box. There's one about doing some floor repairs and getting started, one about tiling the floor, one about replacing the window, and there'll be a few more in future too. Anyway, back to today's job. This cabinet behind me originally had mirror doors, which I've removed for safekeeping as we want to reinstall those. But the problem with this cabinet is that A, it's too shallow to store anything inside, and B, these shelves, which appear to be pine bed slats, have sagged because obviously this is way too big a span for a piece of material so thin. So I need to make this cabinet deeper so that it's more useful and build something strong and sturdy to replace these silly shelves, and then I can reinstall the mirror doors. But the first job is to remove all of this old stuff.
And don't you just love dealing with slotted head screws? These mirrors were stuck to the wall with some kind of adhesive, and the wallpaper peeled off pretty easily. Here I'm cutting away the skirting board. There's an old fireplace behind here, and I think I'll need to add some form of ventilation here later to keep air flowing through the chimney even though it's not being used anymore, just to prevent any moisture problems. The upright on the right hand side was really solid, whereas the one on the left was really flimsy. I thought about ripping this out entirely to begin with and starting again, but I decided just to strengthen it, so I'm using my SDS drill to drill some holes and added some framing screws to secure the batten to the wall. And then I drove in a few more screws to help strengthen everything. And I glued and screwed in some scraps of wood to fill the gaps to make it more rigid. And by the time I'm done with this, it will be plenty rigid enough. It's just an end panel after all. I removed the runners for the mirror doors. Whoever built this originally used some nice sapele wood here, which to me seems really wasteful as pine would have done the job just fine. I'm using 3x2s or 63x38mm CLS timber to build out the front, and after cutting them to length I could just screw them to the uprights to give me another 38mm of depth inside the cabinet. This top piece I glued and screwed in place. I'm going to use some of these thin pieces of plywood as cover panels on the sides of the uprights. I cut them to size with the track saw and then glued and nailed them in place. And the bottom batten can then be unscrewed and moved forward flush with the new timber I added to the sides. And I screwed that with framing screws to the concrete below. I also added a few plastic shims underneath to get it sitting level as the floor was quite uneven. At this point I decided to screw the runners in place again as I just wanted to see if the doors would still run properly after making the adjustments. And they did, so that was good. Here I'm making some cutouts with the jigsaw to fit around the inside. And by this point that upright on the left was nice and rigid, it was no longer wobbling around. Next I mixed up some easy fill to add to the walls to get the surface smooth. I'm no plasterer, but this is an easy enough job for me to tackle, and I can sand away any ridges or high spots. And after doing a few touch-ups, it looked absolutely fine. There's going to be a cabinet sitting in front of it later anyway. While I was waiting for that to dry, I can get started with some woodworking, and as I mentioned in a previous video, when we ordered a few sheets of birch plywood, the delivery driver offered us this cover sheet which was on the bottom of the pallet. This is a huge 3 meter by 1.5 meter sheet, so it's bigger than the usual 8 foot by 4 foot sheets, and I've been storing this for months ready for this particular project. This is 16mm or 5/8 of an inch thick, and even though it was a cover sheet, it didn't have much damage or dirt on it, so I was well chuffed to get this for free, especially as birch plywood is so expensive to buy. Here I'm cutting away a section for what I'll later use to make the large doors to hide the water tank, and I can put that back into storage. And I got the rest of the sheet into the workshop where I can start working on cutting what will be some front surround trim pieces. After cutting them roughly to size, I sanded all the pieces smooth, including the edges, as we're going to be leaving the plywood end grain exposed as a design feature. It's a look that we really like. Both the top and bottom panels are going to need to be scribe fitted because I knew that my ceiling and floor wouldn't be perfectly straight. So after clamping it in place, I used a compass to scribe the contour of the ceiling onto the workpiece. I could then cut along that pencil line using my jigsaw. But before fitting this particular piece, I also needed to remove some material so that the panel will fit around this ridge on the door runners. So I took some measurements of where it was in relation to the ceiling and I marked those onto the workpiece. I also marked up where the cuts would need to start and stop. And then I made a series of cuts with the track saw. I could then chisel away the rest. This is pretty rough, but it didn't need to look pretty as no one will ever see it. Before fitting this piece, I'm going to add some finish, and I'm using acrylic spray varnish, mainly because it dries very quickly so that I can carry on working without having to wait for it. In between coats, I denibbed with some 400 grit wet and dry paper to get a nice smooth finish before applying the next coat, and I did 3 coats in total. As it's not an oil-based finish, it's going to help retain that nice pale colour on the birch plywood without making it more of an amber colour. And this is the same finish that I'm going to use for all of the birch plywood throughout this project. I could then glue and nail it in place, and these are 18 gauge brad nails that I'm using, so I can just fill the holes later with some wood filler that matches the colour of the plywood and they will pretty much disappear. Now that this piece had been scribed, it was a nice tight fit, so I just needed a thin bead of decorator's caulk, and this can be painted in with the colour we used on the ceiling later on once it's dry. Then I could measure and cut some upright trim pieces. These also got sanded, finished and fitted in the same way. And then the bottom surround, which again I scribe fitted to the shape of the floor. I can then get the plywood used on the inside of the cabinets primed and painted, and I can get the wall painted too with a good quality bathroom paint. This is the same paint we used on the rest of the walls and the ceiling in this room. One mistake I made here was painting after I'd added the birch ply surround to the cabinet. If I'd have painted it all beforehand, it'd have been much easier. But I didn't, so I had to use masking tape to mask off all of the plywood edges before painting. It took a few coats of paint to get the wall looking nice and clean. I'm going to leave this project here for now as the video is getting pretty long. In the next one I'll be building a cabinet to sit on the inside of the mirror doors, and I'll be making the doors I mentioned to enclose the water tank too. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe for more weekly woodworking videos, and if you'd like to help support the channel you can via PayPal for one-off donation, or via Patreon or YouTube channel membership if you'd like to get early access to my videos, exclusive content including those bathroom videos I mentioned earlier, free project plans and cut lists, and a name credit at the end of my videos. Thank you for watching.